In this video, we're going to cover the sled push. Everyone who has done a Hyrox race knows how difficult of a station it is. We will speak about its relevance for Hyrox, techniques and strategies that you can use for your next race, and then also how to train for the sled push. Additionally, we will give you some options to train with if you don't have a sled available. Now, first of all, let's talk about why exactly the sled push is one of the most challenging stations in a Hyrox race. This comes down to the weight and the resistance the sled provides on the surface you're pushing it on, as it requires you to produce a lot of force. And to produce a lot of force, we usually need to get very tight. This is something we call bracing, and we usually do that with a Valsalva maneuver, where we hold our breath and then push as hard as we can into an object, which is in this case, the sled. But you might have experienced a similar thing when you do a heavy back squat or a heavy deadlift. And this creates a lot of muscle tension, which restricts the blood flow. And additionally, it makes your blood pressure spike. And due to this spike in blood pressure, your heart rate will come up as well. So once you are pushing the sled, you kind of feel fine, but then as you're stopping and try to catch your breath, you realize your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate goes up, and all of a sudden you feel very fatigued. And of course, that's not what you want to feel like in the middle of a race. So what we're going to talk about is how you can avoid this specific fatigue and how to improve your times on the sled. As with everything in Hyrox, we would always recommend you to have a look into the rulebook so you know exactly what you're training for in that particular season. Let's dive into some of the numbers. You have to push the sled for a total distance of 50 meters. And usually this is divided in 4 12.5 meter segments. Remember, this might be subject to change. You might need to be flexible. Okay, let's talk about weights. For the men open division, it is supposed to be 152 kilos. For the pro division, 202 kilos. For the women open division, it's going to be 103 kilos. And for the pro division, 152. And then we have the double divisions, which is always the male weight for the male doubles and the female weight for the female doubles. And then mixed doubles are going to use the male open weight. But with the weights, there's something you have to keep in mind. The surface that Hyrox is using is not your typical AstroTurf. It's a carpet which provides a lot more resistance to the sled than an AstroTurf would do. So what we would recommend is that you base the weight of the sled you're using in training off your experience from your last Hyrox race. Hyrox provides you with a lot of data. If you go to the Mika timing site, you will find out what your sled push time was. What we would recommend now is that you try to apply a similar effort in training, time yourself, and then see if you achieve a similar time. Remember, during the Hyrox race, you will have like the run before, you will have a ski, you have another run, and then you're going into the sled push. So take that into consideration when doing this test, but it will get you relatively close to what it would feel like in the race. The sled push has huge potential to improve your overall race time. What we are going to do next is look at some statistics from the Nice World Championships in 2024. What we have here are the fastest, the slowest, and the median times from all people that did the race in the pro division. And also we have calculated the standard deviation for you. As you can see, the fastest men were able to finish the sled in 1:45, the fastest women 1:52. Then the slowest times were 9:50 and 10:28 respectively. That shows there's a huge range from the fastest to the slowest and kind of highlights the potential of time that can be gained on the sled push. The median times is what we want to have a close look at. 3:10 for the males and 3:42 for the female athletes. And this is kind of where you want to be with your sled. So this is a target you can aim for. And if you're much faster, you know, okay, the sled is not something I have to put too much effort into my training. But if you're significantly slower than the median time, we would definitely recommend that you apply some of the things you've learned in this video to your training to drastically improve your sled. Let's continue to talk about techniques for the sled push. There's one thing independent of the technique you always want to do. To break the inertia of the sled and get it sliding over the carpet, you need to put some power into it. So for example, you're in a Hyrox race and you're approaching the sled. It's always more effort to get the sled going than keeping it moving. So always be prepared that you would need to put a lot of effort in when you want to get it started. We can push the sled with long arms. So here we have our arms extended and the force is going to be transmitted through our forearms, our upper arm, our shoulder and our trunk into the sled. This technique we would usually recommend to smaller athletes if they have a lower center of gravity which is at a similar height to the center of gravity of the sled. If you're a rather tall athlete and you have to push too far from the top, it's going to be very hard to get a good grip on the carpet. The next technique would be pushing the sled with bent arms. Here we also have the point of contact at our hands, and depending on the width of the handles, sometimes also the shoulders. This allows you to place your center of gravity in a different position in relation to the sled and might get you into a more advantageous position. This is something we would recommend for taller athletes, but also a technique that everyone could use. Another technique that has become very, very popular amongst top athletes is the shoulder through forearm contact. So when we use this technique, we're going to put our shoulders through the sled and have our contact points from the armpits down. So our whole forearm is going to be in contact with the handles of the sled. And this brings our center of gravity even closer to the sled. There's a very unique thing that is happening here. We are reducing the surface area of the sled with the ground, and this allows us to push the sled with slightly less drag. At least that's what it feels like when you're using this technique. Also, we don't have as much pressure on our rib cage and we are able to breathe a bit more freely. When you're using this technique, keep in mind that it might change your frequency of steps. You might not be able to get as much stride length in as with some of the other techniques. Another thing you could try out with this technique is pushing more through a flat foot than just to the forefoot. And this is something we would recommend if you feel your calves blowing up during the race. Now let's talk about optimal strategy for your next Hyrox race. One thing to consider is braking the sled often. Think back to what we talked about earlier, that the sled requires a lot of bracing and your blood pressure will skyrocket once you stop pushing. This is something we can avoid by taking frequent breaks. A downside of having too many breaks is that you always need to break the inertia of the sled again. We also spoke about this a bit earlier on, that to get the sled going is a bit more effort than keeping it going. Another strategy you could use is to vary your technique. Remember all the techniques we spoke about and try them out in training. One technique might be faster than another, but it might also require more effort. This is not only how we come in contact with the sled, but also our stride length. You should try out shorter steps or longer steps and then know exactly with your short step length how many steps does it take you to do 12.5 meters, and then the same with your opposite step length. Let's talk about training for the sled push. We always like to start with the principle of specificity. That means try to emulate what you will experience during the race. You will have a run leading up to the sled, and then you will have another run right after the sled. So you could do intervals of 400-meter run into 12.5-meter sled push into 400-meter run, or longer runs into longer sled push into longer runs. And if you want to get an idea how we would program it, you will find the link to our Hyrox program in the description. There are other exercises that help us to build lower body strength that will translate into the sled push. And here you want to consider doing exercises that target knee extension as well as hip extension. Back squats are a fundamental exercise that are very low in technique requirements that allow you to really build up the glutes, the quads, and also a strong core. And this is all something you would need for the sled push. To train specifically for the sled push, we would recommend training back squats in a rep range from 3 to 12 reps. When doing a sled push, we're not using both legs at the same time, we're kind of alternating the legs. So what we would also recommend for your training are single leg knee extension variations. This could be anything from single leg split squats to lunges or single leg step ups. Now let's say you don't have a sled available. What could you do to emulate the feeling of the sled? One possible scenario here is just take a plyo box and push it over the rubber surface of the box. You can even add some plates on top that will add some resistance. But make sure to speak to the owner of your gym first if this is something they would allow. This is everything you need to know about the sled push. If you have any questions, let us know down below, and make sure to check out our courses and training programs. See you in the next one.